because we are. And we're probably going to have to spend more money having armed response units that are ready to face real situations, and we're also going to have to spend a lot more money on our special security services in this country. Because if we can, through the internet, thwart these attempts to barbarise our society, then we should invest money to make sure that it can be done. But the routine carrying of handguns by policemen and policewomen would, in my opinion, be a very retrograde step for British society.
Okay. Will UKIP give women a higher profile within the party? At present, it seems dominates it.
He's worse than Dimbleby, isn't he? There's been no conferring on this at all, by the way. We're supposed to be on the same side. Okay. In the European elections in May of last year, without using all-female shortlists, and without using positive discrimination for women or ethnic minorities of any kind, and I say that with pride, because I think positive discrimination, frankly, is demeaning. It is the wrong approach to these problems. People should get on, regardless of who they are or where they come from, on merit. Yeah. I strongly. And we, on May the 22nd last year in the European elections, without using any of these things, had 7 women elected for UKIP as MEPs. They're doing a damn good job. They're pretty tough, I have to say. They are coping with the Brussels system fantastically well. And those women will increasingly give UKIP a higher profile. This election, this general election, will be fought on 3 key issues. It'll be fought on the economy, it'll be fought on the NHS, and it'll be fought on the issue of immigration and open borders and security. And our health spokesman, Louise Bors, MEP, so one of our 3 top spokesmen is a woman. You'll see a lot more of her on television as time comes on. And in our target seats around the country, there are many female candidates. So I know that Cameron and Miliband think I'm wrong. They think we should go for quotas. They think we should go for female quotas. But if you go for female quotas, you then have to go for racial quotas. I mean, goodness knows where this all ends. And I'm going to fight and resist that. And women will get on and do well and prosper in UKIP, and they'll do it on their own merits. And that, to me, is the right approach.
I think he had a plea for an easy one, didn't he? Instead of letting, interesting word, journalists concentrate on immigration, could UKIP talk more about all the laws the EU have foisted on us that need to be so changed and have brought about such change in Britain?
Well, dictating the media agenda is no easy thing, because they very much decide what they want to talk about, and sometimes they're fair, and sometimes they're grossly unfair. So I don't think the newspapers any longer really drive the opinion of their readers. They used to. Do you remember the 92 election? Neil Kinnock's face on the front page, the light bulb round his head, front page of a Sun, with the last man who leaves Britain, please turn the lights out if this man wins today. And then the next day's headline in the Sun, it's the Sun what won it. Do you know what? In 92, it probably was the Sun what won it. The newspapers then influenced our views hugely. Newspaper sales are in decline. Secondly, we're more cynical as a country about what we're spoon-fed by newspapers, the BBC, or anywhere else. Thirdly, because of the internet, we get different forms of opinion coming into our households, which make us question. So I think the newspapers now, actually, rather than leading their readers, they now reflect the opinion of their readers. And one of the reasons, Chairman, that the newspapers always talk to us about immigration is they know that amongst their own readers, it is the #1 issue. I do agree with the sentiment of the question. There are lots and lots of other things that I do want us to talk about. There are lots of madnesses that have been done to our small businesses, in the name of European law, but it's not easy to get them all publicised. My favourite one, by the way, a Conservative bloke from Boston, up in Skegness, Ken Bagley. And Ken was a fisherman, and it was January, and he was out in the wash, and he was catching sprats. So net with very fine mesh to catch sprats. And he had about a haul on the boat of about 5 tons, and the inspector from DEFRA got on the boat to say, could he examine the catch? Ken said, well, go on. He said, there's a problem, Mr. Bagley. As you know, under European rules, you're not allowed to land immature herrings. And amongst your catch of sprats, there are some immature herrings. And Ken said, well, I've been a fisherman for 40 years and I can't tell the difference. And the inspector said, oh, it's quite easy, Mr. Bagley. If you pick up each fish and rub the underbelly with your Well, of course, they'd all be rotten, wouldn't they, by the time he got through hundreds of thousands of small sprats. And so Ken doesn't go spratting anymore in January. Ken leaves the boat laid up in January now and doesn't earn any money. So there are lots and lots of nonsenses and ludicrous things that happen as a result of EU law that we'd like to expose. But like it or not, whoever asked the question, like it or not, I repeat, this general election will be dominated by the outlook for our economy, the scale of the national debt, what is happening with the National Health Service, and in whose hands it would be safest, and what is happening with the issue of immigration. They are the issues that will dominate the media, that will dominate the television, and on which this election will be fought. I think you all know exactly where we stand on the immigration question. I think on the economy question, if I may very briefly, on the economy question, the Conservatives claim that they've done wonders with the British economy. Think about this. When George Osborne became Chancellor of the Exchequer, our national debt was £850 billion. That was after the years of Labour excess, if you listen to the Tory line. The national debt in May of this year will be 1.5 trillion. They have nearly doubled the size of the national debt, and yet they stand before you and claim economic competence. And Labour won't challenge them, and you can't hear a pipsqueak from the Lib Dems these days on these issues. And what we will say is we have to be honest with people. We as a country are living massively beyond our means. And there are some immediate savings. Doesn't solve all of it, but there are some immediate savings that we would propose. Number one is we don't want to go on giving £55 million a day to Brussels. That ends, all right? Number two, did anyone see the newspaper report this morning? That the government, in the last month, have desperately been trying to spend an extra £1 billion on the foreign aid budget to make sure we were up to our quota. It's not funny. Well, it is funny in some ways, but it isn't really funny, is it? So this country is now spending nearly £1 billion a month on foreign aid. About 12 billion a year, getting up towards that. Of that, 2 billion a year is spent on providing clean water, is spent on providing inoculations, is spent on doing things that we would all consider to be quite humanitarian, good and decent things to do. The other 9 billion is spent, frankly, now as an arm of foreign policy, and in many cases going to dictatorial regimes all over the world that we don't approve of. So we'll save net over 10 billion a year from the European Union contribution. We'll save 9 billion a year from the foreign aid budget. We will take an axe to some of the unnecessary bureaucratic quangos that cost us so much money. Oh, and we won't build HS2, which could cost 70 to 80 billion pounds and only benefit a tiny percentage of the population. So on the economy, we've got some sensible, pragmatic plans for how we can actually bring down government spending without hitting frontline services. And on the NHS, how Labour think they can get away with this, I do not know. But Labour say that the Tories would privatise the National Health Service. UKIP would privatise the National Health Service. Remember, it was the Labour government in 1997 that brought in the PFI contracts, right? where private money, from private equity mostly, got involved with the National Health Service to help build new hospitals. And yes, we did build a lot of new hospitals in Britain. £50 billion was pumped in through PFI into building new hospitals. The repayment bill for that, folks, is going to be 300 billion sterling. And that's what the Labour Party did. They also outsourced many of the functions of hospitals, like cleaning services, etc., to private companies, with results actually that have been far worse than they ever used to be when we ran the National Health Service properly ourselves. And so the sheer hypocrisy of Labour on this is not to be listened to. We do face a huge problem with the National Health Service ongoing from here. Our population, as I've said already, has risen hugely. Our population is ageing rapidly. And we will need, as the years go by, to spend more money on providing healthcare. But what I can't abide is the thought that since 1997, middle management in the National Health Service has grown by 48%. And that now 51% of people who work for the National Health Service have no clinical training whatsoever. Don't tell me that a successful entrepreneurial businessman could not go in to the National Health Service and give us a better bang for our buck.
That dealt with the next three questions. I want to finish with a few Ramsgate specific questions. So sort of bundle one or two of them together. Assuming you get elected on May 7th, and assuming I get elected on May 7th, what are we going to do about the potential application for the concrete and wood chipping business in the Port of Ramsgate?
Well, there's a one-word answer to that, and it's yuck. What a ghastly idea, because it will turn something rather special into a site with huge amounts of noise, potentially quite a lot of pollution. And I think you mentioned, Chris, in your talk earlier, you talked about how Thanet undersells itself in terms of tourism, its beaches, its incredible history, and all the rest of it. And I agree with that 100%. If you want to kill off tourism forever in Ramsgate, then go ahead and have a pulp and concrete making factory there. It seems like a disastrous idea, and I hope it's very much stillborn.
Can I just say we're very generous hearing from us. I'm glad you mentioned the history of weather, because the gentleman here this evening is a local historian who asked if I could give that to you, so you're up to speed on all the historical information you're...
My Neolithic knowledge would be superb, having read this. Thank you.
Second Ramsgate specific question is, what, if anything, can you keep do...
I've enjoyed the book.
What, if anything, can you keep do to help stop the live exports from the Port of Ramsgate?
This is so typical of politics in Britain today. That the issue of the live export of animals is a very emotive one. And I completely understand that. In fact, I regret bitterly that we've closed 1,000 abattoirs in Britain in the last 25 years. I regret it bitterly. You know, good animal husbandry is actually about carrying out the abattoir service as close as you possibly can to the fields or sheds in which the cattle or sheep or pigs live. Why have we closed 1,000 slaughterhouses? EU regulations insisting that vets have to be present, you know, when slaughters are carried out. And I actually spoke at the Slaughterman's annual conference a few years ago. I've never seen more cauliflower ears in all my life. So we're down to about 290 slaughterhouses in Britain. Why does the export of live animals trade work? Do you know why? Take a Kent lamb, all right? Put it off Ramsgate to France. Put it in the field in France for 15 days. grazing, it then qualifies as French lamb. And that is why the trade happens, and that is why the trade works. Under European Union rules, horses are now qualified as food, and the live export of animals cannot be stopped. All right? Even if every single one of our 650 MPs voted to end the live export trade from Ramsgate, it couldn't happen because the British Parliament and government is impotent on this, as it is many other things, because European Union rules say the business can continue. What would I do? Well, of course, after the referendum, we can change those European rules. And I wouldn't want the mass export of live animals. And I would want the sensible reintroduction of small-scale slaughterhouses, local slaughterhouses across this country. The only exemption I would make is the only export of live animals that I think is actually permissible and sensible are things like racehorses and breeding bulls. A total ban wouldn't make sense. There are one or two small-scale examples where exporting live animals would make sense, but I would end the trade as it is. And any of you here tonight that go to any other party meetings in this constituency, if there are any, but if you go, please ask that same question and watch them and see whether they give you a truthful answer. We are not a self-governing nation, ladies and gentlemen. We cannot make decisions on big issues or little issues because we're bound up with European law. And I think that for a country that actually is one of the oldest functioning parliamentary democracies in the world, for a country where those that went before us, twice in the last century, gave massive sacrifice so that we could be free and democratic, it's about time we stood up for ourselves and took those freedoms back.
Okay, rest.
Oh, thank you.
We've got a question here, actually, which is also additionally is a Ramsgate question, and that is River Oak, who are the indemnity partner recently rejected by Third District Council, a suitable partner for TDC? And I'll deal with that in the sense that I've been involved in debates or whatever. The simple answer to that question is we don't know. We don't know because for whatever reason the Third District Council have decided to keep the majority of the information that they hold secret from the rest of the councillors that operate in the council chamber. We have not been allowed to fully see all of the due diligence documents. We have not been allowed to fully see all of the decision-making processes. And most recently, you will have heard the scrutiny panel, who actually have the job of scrutinising what the administration does, being highly critical of the whole process and highly critical of the half-truths that have been spoken about when legal advice has been sought and are not, and when decisions were actually made behind the scenes rather than up front and in public as they were in the early December. I would add one other thing that I think most of us would find odd about the decision that has been made. River Oak are saying that basically they will bring their money over from America and from other places where they could raise private venture capital and risk that money in trying to make Manston Airport work in a way that hasn't been tried before. Instead, it would appear that the administration and senior officers of our council prefer to talk to a British-based regeneration company whose business model is solely based on the winning of grants. And I ask you, what sort of oddity of a decision is it that says we reject entrepreneurs coming in here to risk their money for our good, but we support organisations that require government handouts in order to survive? Not, I suggest, a sustainable model. As you all know, this has gone to the government to actually look at and deal with in terms of their view on the CPO. So we're in a sort of phony war period, waiting for that government response to come back. But I can say that the scrutiny panel that met last week forced the leader of this council to acknowledge that if the government come out and say that they feel in favour of the CPO, the Cabinet and the Council will have to revisit that decision And I can promise you that if they do, we will be supporting any decision that wins entrepreneurial capital rather than further welfare and grant dependency, as has become, it would appear, the policy of some of our elected colleagues. And an easy one to flush.
Right, okay.
What would be UKIP's approach and attitude to the people in Thanet who seem to have become welfare dependent and proud of it?
I think actually welfare dependent and proud of it ought to be a contradiction in terms, in the sense that the incentives to not be on benefit should be so great that people will be proud to get off benefit because they'd have a much better life. And I think, Chairman, the answer to this is you have to have a carrot and stick approach. The carrot is clear. It is that if getting off benefit and going into low-paid employment doesn't make you better off, it's quite difficult to see why many people would actually do it. And I've campaigned since 2006 for a raising of the tax thresholds, a raising of the level at which people start paying tax. And I'm pleased that the Lib Dems actually did pick up that policy, and the coalition has raised levels at which we start paying tax, but nowhere near far enough. So we will fight this campaign with a very simple policy for the low paid, and it's this: anybody earning the minimum wage in this country should not pay tax. No tax on minimum wage would give people a massive incentive to get off benefit. And for those on benefit and boasting about it, and there are some, you're quite right, on benefit and boasting of it, and perhaps making a bit of money on the side in the black economy, doing whatever they're doing, and who are forced, in order to keep their benefit, to go through the motions of booking the odd interview with an employer and then not turning up. That's the classic ruse. The classic ruse that people do. Well, that's where we're going to need the stick, and that's where we're going to be. That's where we're going to need to be a lot tougher, and we're going to have to actually make sure that people do go for job interviews, and if they refuse to accept jobs for which they are physically and mentally capable, they find that after a period of time, their benefit starts to diminish and ultimately end. And for those, and I'm pleased to say it's not that many, but it's too many, for those that wish to live off the state in that way, the rest of the hard-working population are not prepared to go on picking up that bill. All right? Can I have a closing word before I sit down and you close the meeting? Three, right. Well, it was back in the 50s that Eric Morecambe and Ernie Wise were playing Glasgow, and it was supposed to be, and we mentioned this earlier, it was supposed to be the toughest gig in the world. But the Glaswegian audience were absolutely vile to whoever went on stage. And that's where it came from. Eric Morecambe said it was so bad. This sort of tumbleweed was so bad. Either I'll break it up and say, what do you think of it so far? And somebody in the audience shouted rubbish. And on we went. I don't know whether you've enjoyed the evening. I hope you've enjoyed the evening. Yes. I just want to check one thing. How many of you in this audience are not members of UKIP? Hands up. Yeah, it was the vast majority. Thank you. Well, look, we're going to lock the doors now. And I can speak on for some considerable period of... No. Thank you for coming. I want to say this to you. For those of you that have come along here with an open mind and agree with what we're trying to do on Thanet District Council, in the Thanet South constituency, and in national and indeed in European politics, by changing things and by putting power back in the hands of the people, I want to say this to you. I urged last year on the BBC, when Nick Clegg was kind enough to offer a national TV debate with me, something for which I shall thank him as long as I live. And I said then to the camera, join our people's army. Join our very English little rebellion here. It's very respectable, but it's very important, and help us to achieve success in May. And we did. We built that people's army. and we won those European elections. And I would say this to you tonight here. Come and join the People's Army of Thanet, and let's achieve something remarkable and historic here on May the 7th. All you have to do is engage with us, join us, support us, put a poster up for us, deliver a few leaflets for us, and bore your friends and family to death until they submit and say, yes, we will vote UKIP. Thank you.